job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Today we have on the show Rob Partridge, a social care worker from Brothers of Charity, based in Galway, Ireland. He has worked as a freelance journalist, reporting on lifestyle and movie reviews in most of the broadsheets. Most notably, he is the Irish correspondent for an LGBTI+ magazine called Hush. And when he has the time, he is a keynote speaker for the LGBTI+ community on activism and mental health. Rob, you're very, very welcome here today on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, as am I. I think we're going to go down a very different sort of train of thought here, and we're going to go down the interview process from a gay man's point of view.
Yeah.
Because from what I have read on your notes, you are very active in the LGBTI+ community.
Yeah, I came out at a young age, and I was living in the UK at the time, and we had part of the local government act called Section 28, which prohibited homosexuality being talked about quite broadly in a lot of government places, including schools. So when I needed people to support me in my formative years, there was no officials that I could turn to tell me how to get support or where to get support from. And I kind of vowed as I got older that I wouldn't let anybody else go through that. So I like to make sure that, that I'm out there educating people and always being a support for people from my community and for people outside the community who might not have an understanding of what goes on.
Yeah, and I think we had chatted off air, and I had said to you that I almost felt a little awkward saying the word gay to a gay person. And you made a very, very good comment with regards to sometimes it's still used as a slur, and that sometimes I feel like I need permission to say it.
Yeah, excuse me. It is still used as a slur more often than people seem to realise. And the way I always look at it is it can never ever be used as a slur at me. Even if you're saying it in a negative response, all you're doing is telling me exactly what I am. It's like calling me a man with a beard. You're just pointing out what I am. So for me, it's never going to be a slur. But because it's still used in a negative way, same as the word queer, the LGBTI community are bringing that word back. We're taking back that word, and we're using it with power. I know quite a few people, including myself, who now and again would identify as queer rather than gay. And by taking it back, we're stopping it being an insult. But society still isn't ready for that. So there's still a lot of people that use queer and gay as a slur. And to be fair, there's still a lot of gay people who hate the word queer and won't have it said, won't refer to people as that. And that's absolutely fine. They, including me, grew up in a time when that was one of the worst slurs that you would call a gay person. So I get it. I understand why they don't want to. But yeah, it's when you say the word and you feel like you're worried that you're not sure how that person's going to take it. Is it okay to say that that's what they are? Because also you don't know, you might be outing somebody without realizing. You might be the only person that knows. It's so yeah, I get why people are often reluctant to say it, but we'll get there eventually. It's all about educating people.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's like everything. It's once people are educated, it becomes less of a scary subject or a taboo subject because it is out there and it's being spoken about.
Yeah.
This is going to be a seriously interesting conversation, if not for the listeners, for me in general, and for the listeners who are just listening and not watching today. Rob is a bearded man, as he described, a very bearded man. Robert, we're going to go down the line of interviews because that's what we're here for today. But before we even go down that sort of line, I want to understand a bit more about you, and I want our listeners to understand a bit more about you. I know you've given us a little bit of a snapshot there, and I give you a little bit of an introduction, but there's bound to be a really huge highlight in your life that I would love for you to share with our listeners, just so they can get to know a little bit more about you.
Highlight in my life. Do you like? I'm assuming at this point we don't mean like highlight job wise. We mean just me personally.
Whatever you would like. If that's a job, is a massive highlight, or you personally, that's a massive highlight. That's completely up to you.
I think I've been very fortunate to have quite a few highlights or things that I consider highlights in my life. I became chairperson of a Pride committee, and this was called on by the public. To our members of our community asked me to take it on, and that was quite humbling, feeling that I had the trust of them to organise what is one of the biggest celebrations for the LGBT community in the county. Do you know, it's quite humbling being asked to do that. I think one of the other highlights would be being invited to. There's an event that goes on every December in Ireland in the student unions called Pink Training, and it's for students to attend, and it's about understanding life on campus as a member of the LGBTI plus community. So it covers literally everything from being an activist to organising campaigns, organising events, to consent, to understanding, you know, transgender people and their process and their journey, and how you can support them. It literally covers all sorts of topics. And I was asked to speak at that as one of their speakers on mental health and the LGBTI community. And again, that was one of the highlights, I would say, of my life, being able to feel recognised for all the work that I've done beforehand, and now being asked to pass all that knowledge on. And I got so much good feedback from it that it was, you know, it was humbling.
I'm sure it sounds very humbling. It does. It definitely does. But I think even for the sake of balance, understanding that that is a massive high point for you, there has bound to be, like in everybody's life, some sort of low point or a pivotal point that you've thought something has to change here because I'm not happy where I am. Do you have
Yeah,
something along those lines?
I could have quite a few. There's being an out gay man and putting myself out there to support others means being out absolutely everywhere, not hiding, not being somebody I'm not, and that can have huge implications and issues sometimes. From, as I said, being the chairperson of Pride, my face and name were over all of the local papers in our county, which meant whenever I'd walk down the street, there would be people who knew who I was and what I was doing. And come the day of Pride, the week later, I'd be on the front page, which would lead to people who weren't accepting of our lifestyle deciding to have a dig now and again. And that can be, that can be quite difficult to deal with at times. I have my coping mechanisms, and I'm lucky that I know what works for me. But I often get worried when things like that happen to me. I know they also happen to people who might not have those coping mechanisms and might not be ready for it and might not have the big broad shoulders I have and be able to take it on. And it can often be quite low. In fact, last week was quite a low point in the LGBT community with regard to the changes being made on certain social media sites with regard to their hate speech policies. And it's just, yeah, it's sometimes it's soul destroying. You know, it feels like it's a constant fight to exist. And during the marriage equality referendum in 2015, I was part of a group organising door-to-door people to go and say, how are you voting, and maybe educate people. And the horrific stories people had come back with that they were faced with, you know, that was a real low point. But of course, the high point was that it passed by, you know, by a public margin, and that Ireland is the first country in the world to ask its citizens, you know, do you want to approve this? And overwhelmingly they said yes. Yes, that's a nice high. But it's getting to that's a real struggle, you know, that can be a real low point at times.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. And like everything in life, those low points, they also bring a little bit of reflection and learning.
Yeah.
What do you think you took away from that?
That if I can get through things like that, I can pretty much get through anything, because these things can be soul destroying. Like, it wasn't long ago that I suffered homophobic abuse on the street, and I could have easily just sped up my walk, got to my car, and driven off and come home and consoled myself. But instead, I kept my shoulders back and my head up, and I thought, you're not going to stop me being my authentic self. And I'll never let anybody stop me being my authentic self. And it's not so much what I learn from it, it's what I want others to learn from it, especially others from my community. Because one of the things I often say to people when I do these mental health talks, and I do them to the non-LGBT community, or I talk about equality, I ask the audience how many of them have ever had to hide who they were so that they didn't lose a job, or family, or friends, or anything like that. And the answer, you know, within the straight community is always none. No one's ever had to hide who they are. But of course, all of us, we have our secret identity that we keep until we're ready to bring it out. And in work, it can be very difficult for someone who's not out at work, especially if you think about what they call the water cooler conversations on a Monday morning. What do you get up to on the weekend? And you're not out, and you have to stand there and listen to what everybody did with their partners, and then someone asks you what you did, and you have to think. First of all, you have to think about pronouns. So you have to stop saying he and start saying they, because you don't want to give away that it's the same sex partner. And then, even then, you still have to consciously keep thinking, well, if I tell them we went here, they're going to know that might be an LGBT place, or that might be an LGBT event. So I need to come up with something else. And you start lying, and these lies just get out of hand, because you can't, you know, to lie, you've got to have a good memory. And, you know, it just becomes really difficult. So instead of doing all that, they don't join in these water cooler moments, which causes isolation. And it's, you know, so the things that I go through that are low points for me, I learn from them by saying, I've been through this before, I can get through this. Now I need to help others who are going to go through it as well.
Well, it's a wonderful attitude to have, isn't it? But unfortunately, you've had to come through so much to continue to grow that attitude and resilience. And it's unfortunate that this is still the case even in today's society, that this still goes on.
It is, and it does. It's 1 minute you feel like it's getting better, like after the marriage equality referendum, everything just seemed sweet. Things were changing, things were getting so much better. But the last 5 or 6 years, the rise of the far right and things like that, it just feels like it's going downhill again. But the good thing is, I'm not going to give up, because I've seen the positives through not giving up, and I won't let anybody else give up. No matter how much I have to support them, no matter how much I have to help them up, I'm not gonna, you know, we're not going to go down.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And I just want to
Really
pick up on something.
really got off on a tangent there.
Well, I want to actually just bring you back to something you had said there, with regards to jobs and that water cooler chat and having that conversation. Do you find as an openly gay man that even the interview process is maybe either stacked against you, or you feel a little bit uncomfortable, or potentially before you were a more confident gay man, do you think you would have had issues around that interview process?
So personally, no, I've never, because because of how I came out, I've always been very upfront about it. I'm cautious because I don't know how this person's going to react. So I don't go in all flamboyant and, you know, excuse me, wearing rainbow shirts and so.
Hmm.
But if it comes up, I don't hide it and I'm not ashamed of it. And I will talk about it when it comes to the about me section of an interview. In fact, my very first job, this was 1991. I went for my very first full-time job interview. I'd had other part-time jobs, etc. But my very first full-time part-time job, and I really wanted this job. So I went to my dad and asked for some interview advice. I'd never asked anybody for interview advice at all. We've done interview training at school, which was rubbish. But I'd never asked anybody for interview advice. So I went to my dad and I said, tell me what to do. What do I say? What can I expect them to ask? And his first thing was, don't tell them you're gay because you won't get the job. And in some circles, he was right, because at the time, as I said, this was 91. At the time, there were still people who would have said no to a gay person, and there were no anti-discrimination laws. So we wouldn't have had any way of any callback or anything if that's the reason they didn't employ us. But I went for this interview. I sat down, and in my head, I'm saying, don't tell them you're gay. Don't tell them you're gay. Excuse me. Really quick drink. Sorry about that. Oh, I do apologize. That makes for a good podcast, isn't it? So, in my head, I'm saying, don't tell them you're gay. Don't tell them you're gay. And the interviewer said, tell us a bit about yourself. And the first thing I said was, well, I'm gay. It was all that out of my head. Now, in the end, I got the job. I'm really sorry. Oh, dear. I'm just getting over a cold. Oh. Oh, Kevin, I'm really sorry. So, a few months later, we were out with the boss, and I asked him why I got the job over other candidates. And he said it was because I came out with such a brave and honest statement straight away. That it didn't matter what I said afterwards. If I was being honest about something that so many people still kept hidden, I was going to be honest about everything else. And that was one of the reasons why I got the job. Obviously, again, because I was also the perfect candidate.
Of course, that's absolutely correct.
But I think for other people who aren't out, it's always an issue, because it's the same as the water cooler moment. It's always there. It's always, how do I say this without letting them know that I'm gay? Because you never know how someone is going to react when you make a disclosure about your sexuality or your gender identity, anything like that. You don't know how these people are going to react to what you're about to say. And you have to be very cautious, because if it's a job that you want, that you really want, that you've worked hard for, that you have the qualifications for, that you've prepared for, and you think that this could be the one thing that stopped you being that candidate they choose, it's the kind of thing that you would try to hide. And it can be soul destroying just even trying to hide it, because again, you're not living authentically, you're not being your best self, and it can make things really difficult. Thankfully, with the way society has gone, I genuinely don't think any employer, not just because of the legal side of things, but because I just don't think they would. I don't think any employer would ever turn anybody away just because of their sexuality. I think things have changed so much that employers now are saying, well, we need the best candidate regardless of whether they're, whether they are gay or not. I don't think it's a bit now.
Yeah, I think businesses want the best person for the job because they're finding it more and more difficult to find the right people. No matter what organization, business, or business person I speak to, they will always say, Kevin, it is so difficult recruiting at the moment. It is so difficult to find the right person. I think if the devil was qualified, they would employ him.
About 8 or 9 months ago, I was talking with a CEO who had invited me in to talk to his staff about mental health stuff within the LGBT community. It was all to do with Pride Month. And I'm there and I'm talking, and afterwards we just started talking about the different policies they had. And I said, do you have a diversity and equality policy? And he said, actually, we do. And he said, but it needs updating, and I don't know who to ask. He says, because I don't want to say, would you mind doing this? In case they're not out and they feel like I'm outing them by writing this. And I said, well, do people disclose in the interview? I said, because if they've disclosed in the interview, then that's the person who would help you write it. And he said, yeah, sometimes. He says, I wouldn't ask it, even if they're disclosing, that's fine. I said, would it make a difference on you employing them? He said, absolutely not. He said, to be honest, I'm more likely to employ a gay person because they're not going to have kids. And I'm in my head, I'm like, I can't say that.
It was from the, oh my word.
Yeah, right, no, that's not how it works. And to be fair, when I challenged him on it, he apologized. He called me back to his office about 2 weeks later and said, I need to talk. And we had a great conversation and educated him around stuff, so at least he was prepared to listen.
Well, from the frying pan into the fire,
yeah,
he just jumped there. That was okay.
It was going so well, and then just that one phrase,
Oh, and listen, do you know what? As I mentioned previous, I deal with lots of business owners, past and present, and there is some train of thought that you have just mentioned. This still happens, unfortunately. It still happens, and
but
it's
at least he was honest enough to accept that he realized he was wrong, and he was brave enough to say, I need educating, which is what would help if more people did that. If more people, when they got it wrong and they're challenged on it, if they said, okay, tell me more, instead of walking away and still thinking that they're in the right.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it, isn't it? It's about being curious and being educated. But again, just picking something up that you had mentioned with regards to, if the candidate's going to say that they're gay within the interview, that then potentially everything after that is going to be the truth because that was one of the hardest things they potentially were going to say. That to me sounds like they're a very trustworthy person and they hold that value very close to them. And employers love that, as you know now, by doing what you did. But there must be some type of value that you have that you would absolutely love to see in a candidate whenever you're on that interview panel. What would that value be?
So I want ingenuity. I want people who can think outside the box. So in the lines of work where I have been doing interviews, I would be interviewing people who would work with families, and these families may have problems. And it could literally range from anything from being a one-parent family to having both people at home, but just moved to that. The problem could be they just moved to the area and they don't know anything. They don't know anybody in the area or anything like that. So I would be looking for people who, when presented with a problem and they offer a solution, and that solution is turned down or doesn't work, rather than saying, well, that didn't work, I'm done. They track back and look at the steps and say, okay, let's do it again, but we'll swap this step for this one. That's what I want from people. And I want the integrity and the honesty to be able to say, do you know what, that didn't work because I did it this way, so now we'll do it that way. Or even the integrity to say, that didn't work because it's me, so you need to send somebody else in. You know, I qualified as a life coach a few years ago, and one of the things that we would always say to our clients, if during the first 45 minutes of getting to know each other, at the end of it, if you don't think it's going to work, we would refer them on to a different coach, because if we've got no relationship, I'm not going to be able to help them. And I think that's what I would look for in a candidate.
I think that's quite evident as well, just in how you speak with regards to, you're looking for those people with integrity and honesty, because even working with families and vulnerable families is sometimes that you work with. You want someone that will hold their hands up and say, I tried that, it didn't work. But how does that look in an interview though?
I think in an interview you would be asked to give an example. And like the one example I would give from my current job would be around, I used to look after a guy who hated the cinema. So I was told by the staff. Yet other staff told me how much he loved the cinema. So I said, I'm going to take him to cinema, and off we went. And sure enough, it didn't go well. And I came home, went back to the unit, and I wrote a statement out to myself, exactly what we did and how we did it and what we did. And then I took him again a week later, and I crossed off one of the things and replaced it with something else. And it took 7 times. And on the 7th time, we walked into that cinema and he sat down and watched a movie. And now he goes every couple of weeks to go and see a movie. And it's because of the going back and working out, trying something different, and being brave enough to say, well, I wonder, is it me? Am I the reason that they don't want to go? You know, and sending them with another member of staff and getting a report back from them. So I think in an interview, to answer your question, I think in an interview, I would be asking people to give me an example of a time they've solved a problem, thinking outside the box. The other way I have seen that kind of thing done is I saw somebody in an interview being given a wooden spoon and said, that's not a wooden spoon, tell me what it is. And making them think laterally, you know.
Do you know, when you asked that question, I started to think. So that's very good, actually. Yeah. That's very good. What is that? What is that? Well, it's a wooden spoon. Yes, that's obvious, but what else could it be? It could be something to prop open your door, something to prop open a window. It could be in as it is in most Irish family households, it's a weapon of mother's choice, to beat the closest child. It could be.
I said it was a back scratcher.
It's a back scratcher. It literally could be anything other than what it is.
There is the thing as well. I know in one of the things that I was reading a few months ago was different interview questions for some of the big Fortune 500 companies and the questions that they ask. And one of them is explain the fruit and orange to an alien. And you have to think not just about the color, you have to explain the color, but the surface, what's inside, and not just the flesh, but the juice, the pips, everything. Do you know? And that was one of the questions that was there, and it's those kind of questions that I would have in an interview, and I would explain at the very beginning that there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm looking for your version of this. Do you know? So you're not going to be marked down because you think you've got the wrong answer. I'm just looking for your version of it.
Many years ago, when I was doing interviews and looking for a particular type of person, a particular type of person I would be looking for would be a very trustworthy and honest, but quite forward and open person, which are very, very difficult to find. The question I always asked them was, have they ever stolen anything? And you would get the people who would stand there and go, oh, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'm thinking, everybody has. At some stage, it's something everybody has. And then I got this really good one. I'll say good because it sort of took me back. I wasn't expecting. He says, "Yeah, absolutely have, absolutely." He says, uh, as recently as the weekend, he says, I was out in a bar in a nightclub, and I managed to steal this girl's heart. And I thought, wow, just wow. You are the type of person I'm looking for because it was for a sales job. It was for someone who was open and funny and the type of person that I needed for that time. And they slotted into that post and position, became one of the best salespeople I ever had because they thought differently and thought outside that box. And as a salesperson, that's what you want, that's what you need. That's part of it. Of course, that's part of it. But it's not the whole thing. But even when we track back to some of those interviews that you would have done and you'd have been sitting on the panel, there's bound to be times where you're sitting thinking, right, we're near the end of the interview, and you ask the question that everybody seems to dread. Do you have any questions for us on the panel here? There's bound to be once, maybe a couple of times that someone has asked you a question that's either completely stumped you or you've sat back and you've went, I like that. I really like that question. Do you have something like that, Rob?
So, not so much that they've stumped me, but when I used to interview for the helpline, we had a person come along who did one of the best interviews ever, had got experience of the kind of calls that they would be taking, brought a wealth of lifetime experience to them. And I just thought, you are perfect. This is, and I've got the guy next to me who's interviewing with me, the two of us, we're nodding at each other and we're, listening to this person tell us their stories. And I'm like, this person's going to take over from me when I leave because
Mhm.
they have everything. And then I said, do you have any questions for us? And they said, so you're a helpline. Do I actually have to answer the phone? I just like, what did you come here for? Do you know, this is the whole point of things. So it's not exactly questions that have stumped me. And I think part of that could be Toastmasters training. Even if I don't know the answer, I know a way of answering it that makes it sound like either I'm going to find out, or I'll get back to them, or I do know. And so yeah, not so much that they've stumped me, but just that they are incredulous. Some of the
Yeah.
some of the questions. Like, do I
I,
have to phone it to helpline?
I think for me that would have been a huge red flag.
Oh
A
yeah,
huge red flag for me.
yeah.
What other red flags do you look out for whenever you're interviewing? I know what I look for, but what do you look for?
I kind of have three main ones. My first one would be interrupting. I can't abide being interrupted. If I'm asking a question and you think you know where the question's going and you start talking, then instantly I'm just put off. And no matter how well you answer that question, I'm probably not paying attention to what you're saying because I'm already too annoyed that you interrupted me. My other one would be people who reframe a question, which is quite the skill. And I like it when they do it. Like I find it quite clever, but I don't like it. So if I say to them, what do you, if you got this call, how would how would you handle it? And they start talking, and by the end of it, the thing they've answered, the way they've answered, has absolutely no semblance to the question you asked in the first place. I'm like, either you didn't listen, or you're one of those that just waffles. And I need somebody who's going to be straight to the point. So that's for me is always a red flag. And my last one, which is a really silly one, but it's personal to me, when they sit down. If we go, so we have a little waiting room, and the people are waiting there, and we come out, we call them in, we bring them into the interview room, and if they sit down before me, no, instantly puts me off. Or if they sit down before I've said, please take a seat, instantly put off. And I think that could be part of the way I was brought up. It's like my dad, well, actually he doesn't anymore because of cars, but growing up, if my mom stood up, my dad would stand up from the table. So, and I think it's all that. You didn't sit down until you were told that you could sit down, and I think that's still stuck in me. And I won't do it going into interviews, no matter what.
Yeah.
I was interviewed on a radio show a few months ago, and I walked into the studio and stood at the back until I was told to feel free to take a seat, something like that, because I just can't do it. And if anybody else does it, it's just yeah.
I think you and I are very similar in that sense. I want to use the term we are old-fashioned thinkers, men of tradition, but I think old-fashioned thinkers is probably a better term. I'm in the same vein of or same train of thought where I don't sit down until I am prompted to sit down. If I go into any business meetings, into with any clients, I will say, "There's the seat. Help yourself," because I don't want there to be any sort of awkwardness because I know that that is a little not trigger, but I know that that could be a trigger for me, and I get ahead of that before it happens. But there are lots of interviewers that you're not alone in this, by the way. There's lots of interviewers who will say exactly that. They will watch to see if they sit down before they're even asked.
Yeah.
Now I've asked many times of why is this a little bugbear for them, and they've said the same thing as yourself. It's a bit of a traditional value that they have within them. It's a respect thing, and they just don't make an assumption. And I think there was two, the very first thing you had said around the interrupting and making assumptions. It sounds like you don't like people making those assumptions at all. Like you don't want them to make an assumption that they should sit, and you don't want them to make an assumption of where this conversation might be leading, and then just jumping in and cutting you off.
I mean,
We all,
yeah, that could be it. Absolutely. The
but
interrupting bugs me no matter what. But in an interview, I think, especially because in my head, what I'm saying is, if you're interrupting me because you think you know where the question's going, and it's not going where it actually is, or rather, it's not going to go where you actually think it's going, you're going to make a big mistake. So wait until I have said the entire question. It's
Mhm.
because you can easily slip up. And as I said, assume the wrong thing and answer the absolute wrong question. Give them information they're just not interested in. And I know some interviewers who wouldn't even bother asking the question again or saying, no, look, what I'm actually looking for is this. They would just move straight on because they've already made the mind of this person isn't for them, which is another thing that I don't like. I don't like people
Yeah.
make their minds up that quickly. I think regardless, even my feelings around the chair and reframing questions, it still wouldn't. They're red flags, but they're not. You're not getting the job. They're
Mm.
red flags, but they're things. Okay, well, if they're good enough, we can maybe talk about that. If it's that huge a thing.
Because it is a personal thing. Those
Mm.
those three red flags, and any most of the red flags are quite personal, and they're not the make and break. It's the right person for the right job at the right time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way it works for most organizations nowadays. But the interviewers are only human.
Oh
They
yeah.
all have their biases. As much as they try to untrain themselves before they go into that interview, they will all have a bias of some sort. And acknowledging that bias even before you go in and making yourself aware of them is half the battle of getting
Yeah.
them out of the way when you're there. It's
Absolutely.
also
Like
great.
unconscious bias is a huge thing. You
Yeah.
know, you need to admit that you've got it. Like I'll be the first to turn around and say to an audience, no, I haven't, to anybody within the audience, but I absolutely have. And I know what I want is I want them to say, but you have. I don't want them to say, oh, that's very good. He must have learned not to have any of this unconscious bias. I want them to turn around and say, well, you have. By the end of the talk, they do. They are challenging me on it, and I'm showing them that I do have unconscious bias. We can't help it. It's the way it is. This is why I
Yes.
think interviews should always be at least 2 or 3 people,
Yeah.
because what I think about a candidate might be very different to what you think about a candidate. And I could be throwing somebody away that you've seen amazing potential in. and that's not fair on them. So
Yeah.
I always think there should be more than just one-to-ones in interviews.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right because of that unconscious bias that comes from your own past experiences, and everybody has different past experiences. Even if they experience the same thing, they still have different past experiences of that situation and experience. It's because we use filters every day within our own head. Does it meet our values? Does it meet how we've been brought up? Does it meet what our expectations are? All of these values are constantly going on, and then we filter that information through, and then we try to put that into memory. You and I could both see the same car accident from the same angle at the same time, and both of us could see something very, very different.
Yeah.
And it has been proven, there's been loads of research done on this, and I think that was actually the police had done a bit of research with regards to how witnesses witness things and how they report it. Because they could both, and I used that example of the car crash. But if you also on the panel, if the panel was diversified as much as possible, and I mean age, gender, ethnicity, everything, everything, it would make it so much more fair.
Yeah.
It would make it so much more fair. Almost like, and I don't want to use the analogy like a boxing match where you have the referees on the outside who are all individually scoring, and then the scores are all added up together, and then the overall. That, in my opinion, would be a very fair. Not to get the candidates into a ring and have them fight it out. Well, if we think about an interview, it potentially is. If you're down to the last two, but that would be a very different type of job, a job
Yeah.
interview process. And
I,
I know that I know this one maybe doesn't, the process that we currently all use isn't maybe the best, but I don't think that would be an alternative.
No, I'll be honest. I won't be applying for any job that requires some kind of Hunger Games before we go in.
That's good to know. That's good to know. Rob, we've come to the stage of the interview where we're going to change pace ever so slightly, okay? So for all of our listeners, this is our quick fire round where we will throw questions at Rob quite quickly, and all Rob has to do is answer with a yes, a no, or a pass. Okay, so that's a yes, no, or a pass. So
Okay,
Rob, are you ready to go?
go for it.
Is it acceptable to wear pajama bottoms to a Zoom interview?
No,
Is it okay to bribe the interviewers?
no,
Is it wise to ask the interviewer for a selfie together at the end?
no.
Should a candidate smile during the interview?
Yes.
Should you answer the first question with a dramatic pause for effect?
Pass.
Should women wear high heels to an interview?
Pass.
Is it acceptable to ask the interviewer how much they make?
Yes.
Should you high five the interviewer at the end?
No.
Should a candidate swear during an interview?
Pass.
Is it acceptable to bring your mom to the interview for moral support?
Pass.
And that's the questions over, Rob. How was that for you?
As yeah, as I said to you before, I didn't want to say pass. I wanted to say depends, and I wanted to be able to explain my answer.
But Rob, if you would like to explain your answer, why did you pass on should a candidate swear during an interview?
Because I think it very much depends on the culture that you're working in. If one of the things that on the helpline, one of the things that we would say to our candidates is they have to be able to language match, sorry, with the caller. So if a caller rings up and starts referring to genitalia or anything like that using a particular word, you have to be comfortable using that word as well. Because if you change it, if you start saying a different word, a word you're more comfortable with, subconsciously what you're saying to that person is you don't accept that word, and that can be really off-putting for a caller. So in some interviews with some organizations, I would say swearing when necessary is fine. I don't mean every other word, and I don't mean while you're answering the general question, but if you are asked, explain this to me, then yeah, sorry.
That's very good. That's very good. because you do language match, or we do try to teach and train people to language match as much as possible, even in the interview, by using certain terminologies and certain wording and certain phrasing, because that actually could be the difference between you getting the job and not, if you're using the same terms and words and phrases that the organization and company uses.
Well, I honestly think schools should put more of an emphasis on it, because they do it without realizing they do it. If you go at school, whenever we had an exam, school, college, university, the works, whenever we had an exam, it was going to be a written essay exam. The lecturer would always say, use some of the words that are in the question. Do you know, these are the kind of answers that they want. And it's the same when doing your assignments. Do you know, they're looking for those, the way the question is worded, they're looking for those words to be in the assignment somewhere. So it's taught very subtly at schools, but I think it should be pushed a little bit more to allow children to understand exactly what it means and how beneficial it can be. You know, you can easily put someone at ease by matching their tone, their pace, their language. You know.
Yeah, and it does work. You and I both know that it works. It's a very, very easy way to build rapport very quickly. Is to pattern language match and pattern match modeling, mirroring. It's very, very I say it's very easy. We do this for a living, and we had to learn this. But once you understand it, it becomes very, very easy. You can do it subconsciously. Don't even have to think about it anymore. But it's as you said, it's really beneficial for school children, and I think that that's where it should be taught. I would do quite a lot of coaching for years 12s, 13s, and 14s in school. They would bring me in to help them through their interview process, whether that be for university, colleges, higher level apprenticeships, medical interviews, or someone that potentially is going just to leave school and go to work. And that is something that we talk about, how they word their question back to really help the interviewer tick the box easier.
Yeah.
Because an interview, in my opinion, is just a game.
Oh yeah.
Once you understand the rules of the game, you know what you can do and what you can't do. And you can also stack the cards in your favor if you know what the rules are. Because you can prepare better. You can execute better. You can deliver better. And then if you've done all of those, and potentially you still didn't get the job, then you know you've done everything you can, and you can walk away feeling like you've done everything without feeling like, oh, I could have said this and I should have said that, and I didn't leave everything in the room. And that's what a lot of people come out of an interview with: regret. They regret the things they don't do. And it's another thing we try to help the students understand is don't regret the things you don't do. Sorry, don't regret the things you do. You will regret the things you don't do. So go in and just leave it out there.
Yeah.
Just leave everything out on the table, see what happens. And be honest, like you had said at the original start of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, my current role, I was asked a question about a policy, and I turned to the interviewer and I said, if we can go and get in my car and go to my current office, I can hand you the file where that policy is. But my brain has gone blank and I cannot tell you one word that's in that policy. There was no point me trying to bluff my way through it and hope that at some point my brain would switch on and I'd remember the wording of this policy, because that's a risk that I wasn't prepared to take, because there's no guarantee that my brain would switch on or that I would remember it. It was annoying that I did know that policy like the back of my hand, but at that particular moment in time, I completely lost it. I couldn't remember it. And these things happen. With the best will in the world, you can learn your lines for a part. You can learn a speech off the top of your head as many times as you want. There's nothing to say that when you get up there, you're not going to have some kind of mind flip and just forget where you were. And I think just saying, look, I can tell you exactly where it is and I know what it's about, but I can't tell you what's in it. I think that helped me get the job.
Well, again, it's back to that integrity and the honesty state part, isn't it? Now, Rob, we've come to the stage of our interview, what everybody's been waiting to hear, and it's about your worst interview ever. So, Rob, I'm going to hand this over to you for now.
So I have two. I have one that's very quick, which I made the mistake. I was young and I was foolish, and I made the mistake of the night before the interview going out with some friends and having way too much to drink. And I went, not only did I go in with a hangover, I was offered a glass of water. I took the water, and after about 3 sips, I threw up all over the desk. So I just made my excuses and left. That goes down as one of the worst. But I think another one that I like to say to people is my worst, because it was the hardest and most difficult interview I ever had. Also turned out to be one of the best interviews I ever had. My husband and I were applying to be foster carers, and we were the first gay men, first LGBTI plus men in our county to go through the process. Others had applied and had pulled out at some point through the process, but we'd followed it all the way through. And when it came to the interview panel, my husband couldn't be there, so I was there on my own, just me and my social worker. And this was in a room of me, her, and 22 other people, who were all part of the social services, who decided whether we could be a social worker or a foster carer or not. And one of them was a child psychologist. And I'd been very open about my sexuality. I had to be, obviously, because they knew it was two men in the house. And he said, one of the questions he asked was, if a child came back to you and said he was being bullied because you're gay, would you hide your sexuality? And I said, I wouldn't hide it. I said, but I might change some of the things that we do. And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, we wouldn't go down to the school together, and if we're there, we wouldn't be holding hands. We don't do that anyway, but we'd make sure we'd make a conscious effort. And he says, but you wouldn't hide your sexuality. I said, no, absolutely not. And he said, okay, you make all those changes and the child comes to you and says he's still being bullied because you pick him up and everyone knows you're gay. What are you going to do then? I said, then Brad, start picking him up. I says, whatever we need to do to support that child. So you're going to hide that you're gay? And I says, no. I says, we're just going to change our behavior. And he says, if you change your behavior, you're hiding the fact that you're gay. And he really drilled into me, and it was horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And I came out of that interview, which lasted about 45 minutes to an hour. I came out of it shaking. And my social worker, she gave me a hug. She told me how well I've done. And I turned to her and said, if I ever see him again, I'm going to kill him. And she said, he's the department's child psychologist. You will see him again. And I said, well, I won't, because he's not going to approve us. So we sat in the waiting room for about 20 minutes, and the head of the services came out and congratulated me and told us we'd been approved. And then the child psychologist came out, and the first thing we did was apologize for putting me through the ringer. And then he said, we do that because we want you to get angry, because we need people who are passionate about the priority of the children, not about themselves. And that's exactly what we did. And I needed to twist it and keep twisting it to make you feel uncomfortable, so that to see that you would still put that child as paramount to what was going on. As soon as you did, he said, I'm really sorry for putting you through it. So that was it. That was my worst and hardest interview. But as I said, it was good things came from it, but it was really difficult to sit and go through at the time. The other thing was as well, they'd never had gay couple get to that point. No one knew what to do. All the forms that we'd filled in were still male and female. We had to have a senior social worker assigned to us so that she'd got the authority to cross female out and put male one and male two. At the time, because no one else had got that authority to do that, because she's altering what is essentially a government document.
Wow.
So yeah,
well,
that was one of the hardest that I've been through.
Well, I think for all of our listeners who's been through some interviews, I don't think any of them that I have heard of has been through something as grueling as that, to the point where they're trying to physically make you angry.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he did
I'm sure you
internally.
learned a lot about yourself that day.
Oh, absolutely. I learned that I can keep it in because I was internally, I was shouting and I was furious with the way he was going. And I had the questions that came afterwards were very much along the lines of, you know, what kind of outdoor activities would you do with the children that you would have? And I answered them, but I didn't answer them as fully as I could because all was going through my head was I was writing that letter of complaint I was making about him. You know, I was going to have him struck off for the way he treated me. Literally, I went through so many different things in my head about what I was going to do to this guy for the way he made me feel in that interview. Like talking about it now, I feel my chest going. It just, you know, it's.
I can actually, for the listeners, I can actually see Rob sort of tightening up his chest, and he's getting really agitated, and his arms are out and tight, and you're still feeling it.
I do. When I think about that, I do. But as I said, good things came from it. We got approved as foster carers. We were the first in the county, and we weren't the last. And
Brilliant.
the people on that panel knew how to treat the next gay couple that came along. And I know quite a few of them that came along because we were asked, as it was two men in the house, we were asked to go along and help with some of the training with the new foster carers. Once we'd been the foster carer for a while, they asked us to get involved in the training because we could give it from an all-male perspective. And I got to meet some of the other LGBTI couples that came through, and I would always say to them, look, just be prepared. It's going to be awful, but there's reasons for it, and I promise you they're all good. And you know, it was. I think I would like to think that they've changed the way they do those interviews now because they're more educated. They've had more LGBT people come through. They don't need to push boundaries and ask those kind of things. But of course, at the time, they've never had a gay couple get to that point. So we were like a test case for them, you know.
Well, congratulations and commiserations all at the same time. Again, you had to go through that to see the real benefit of it on the other side. And you're obviously a trailblazer, you and your husband, trailblazers, because you're going ahead and you're doing all of this hard work for the people that are coming behind.
Yeah, I have some big shoulders to stand on. The people that came before me, who paved the way for me to be able to live my authentic self. I owe them a great debt, and my way of saying thank you is to make sure that those that come after me have the same opportunities, you know, if not more.
Absolutely, Rob. You know, this has been one of the most fascinating interviews I think I have done to date for this podcast. It has taught me a lot, and for a straight man, I would never have thought that there was things like this that happen in the background because it's just not within my purview. I don't obviously think about these things, but understanding what goes on, it's not right, in my opinion, and it should never happen.
No, it shouldn't, but it does, and it is getting better. You know,
That's good.
the media will let you believe that it's not. The media will let you believe how things, you know, how there should be segregation for us and things like that because they're swayed by the biggest voices, and we might not have the biggest voices, but we have the biggest fighters with us, and you know we won't go down without a fight. You know, but it is getting better. You know, if I look back at how things were when I first started going to gay bars. And these were the days when you knocked on the door and the thing slid back and they looked you up and down to see if they were going to let you in because they were private only clubs. You couldn't have a public gay bar that just wasn't allowed. And that was the only way you could do it. They'd look you up and down to see if you were allowed to come in. And now you have these big flamboyant bars with nice glass frontages, you know, where everyone can see in who's there. and everyone goes in them. They're always full of stag and hen do's because they have the best music. So you would never have got that 35 years ago. So it is getting better on all fronts. It's getting better, but it's still,
it's just slow.
yeah, there's still a fight.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure you'll never give it up,
Yeah.
which is absolutely fantastic. Now, Rob, I want to, just for the listeners, because there was a lot of information in there and a lot of amazingly great takeaways, I want to just try and summarize this for some of the listeners. I think for me, and just touching on your second worst job interview ever, and I think it's quite prevalent to everybody, is do not go out drinking the night before you have your interview. That is not the way you should prepare for an interview, even if it's an interview that you potentially don't have your heart in. Do not do it. Do not do it. The second thing for me is it's around making assumptions in an interview. And I know we can do that because sometimes we get a little bit nervous. We want the interview to be over, so we tend to jump ahead of what the interviewer is saying and try to answer the question even before they have stopped. In my opinion and in my head, if someone does that to me and I'm on the panel, what I'm thinking is this is how they will behave in the workplace. They will make lots of assumptions, and most of the time they will not be the right assumptions. They will cause more grief and strife than actually helping reduce the time. They will potentially increase the amount of time because they have to go back and redo and correct and apologize. So don't make the assumptions. But I think the biggest takeaway for me, the biggest takeaway for all of the listeners should be about the integrity and the honesty. And that sits really well with an employer, because that's the type of people that every employer wants. They want people who do what they say and say what they do, but they also want people who, when they make a mistake, they hold their hand up and go, that was me. I have made this mistake. But in the same sense, the company itself has to be mature enough to allow people to come forward with a mistake and to own that mistake without fear of retribution. And not all companies are like that.
Yeah, I'm very lucky that the organisation I work for, they acknowledge that these things happen. You know, we work looking after people, and we can't always predict their behaviour, and sometimes we get it wrong. And we do have a no blame culture, as it were. And I've seen that no blame culture in action. And as such, when I make a mistake, I have no fears at all going up. I have the usual nerves. Oh God, what are they going to say? You know, but I don't fear risk losing my job for the mistakes that I might have made. You know, because there's no point saying I don't make mistakes. Everybody does. You know, it's how you deal with it and how you learn from that mistake is what matters.
Absolutely. And that's another great takeaway, Rob. So thank you for that. Rob, we are at the end. And if any of our listeners would love to reach out to you, where would be the best place to do that?
So I'm all over the Blue Sky social media. You can find me on that. Rob Partridge at bsky.social is probably the best way. If someone has a burning question about anything that I've said, or about any kind of activism, or anything to do with the helpline or the community itself, and they get in touch with you, I am quite happy for you to forward it on to me. But if they want to bypass you, then they can find me on robpartridge.net or on, as I said, Blue Sky, Rob Partridge I think it's .bsky.social. I can never remember. I don't use Facebook, and I don't use Twitter or Instagram. So yeah, Blue Sky or my website, robpartridge.net.
Okay. Rob, thank you very much. For anybody that wants to reach out to Rob, all his contact details will be in the show notes. So Rob, thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/my worst interview ever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, On the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.